Hi, I'm Brandon Ferdig with the Periphery. There are about eight or nine U.S. states that haven't yet enacted a statewide shutdown due to the coronavirus. Now, that's noteworthy for a couple of reasons. One, 41 have, that's a big number. And two, all those states, the ones that haven't, all have something in common. And that thing is that they're all red states, they're all conservative leaning states. Now, you might automatically respond with some derogatory remarks about Republicans or conservatives. They're anti-science. They don't care about people's health. Or you might come at it from the opposite way and say, "Oh, thank goodness we still have eight or nine states that care about freedom, or that aren't getting wrapped up into the hype of this COVID-19." That's not really the point. I'm not here to take a side on it. I'm here to simply point out that beyond those kinds of reactions to this fact that eight or nine states haven't yet enacted shutdown, beyond that fact, beyond their reactions to that fact, is the truth that ideology has played a big role, is playing a big role, probably too big of a role, in the response, in the reaction to this virus. Ideally, when you're dealing with something very serious like this, which isn't up for debate, the seriousness of the situation, you want people, one would hope one would react as much driven by the data and the truth of the matter as possible. But there are still different routes one can take depending on their ideology. And the risk of that is if ideology becomes too big of a factor, you'll not do the best method for everyone. You'll not save the most lives. You'll do what's preferred based on your worldview and not necessarily what's best for the situation. And this is really the lesson of this video. It's not to say that any state is doing it right or wrong. It's just to simply say that ideology is a factor, and to watch it and how we respond, how you respond. Other examples of ideology being involved is, I think, in how people wish we would have done it like Korea, Japan, Singapore handled it. And yet that was never really a possibility for the U.S. because the U.S. was, the U.S. isn't like these other countries, right? That's obvious. We're so diverse and large and populated. Any kind of unified effort from the top down would have been, maybe not impossible, but the idea that we should have done something like that, I think, is driven by, one, just the desire to get things done, because now those countries are moving beyond it, but also a desire driven by ideology, because it's not as offensive for people who lean left to have a top-down regime, whereas people who lean right tend to be a bit more leery of control. They want their freedom. They tend to be more just offended by taking away freedom. That's not to say that liberals like taking away freedom. I'm not saying that, but I will say that people who lean left are less offended by a statewide shutdown by law than people who lean to the right. It's just not as concerning to them. And that's just simply ideology at play, because the numbers coming from these red states aren't a whole lot different than the numbers from the blue states. And whereas you can say the areas that these red states are less populated, and that's true, like Wyoming, which hasn't had a single death, for instance, at least as of 1 or 2 days ago, Iowa, they are less populated, but they still have population centers that are significant, and certainly more significant than most other states. Like you can look at rural areas of every state and say, well, why did those have to be shut down? If, say, Cheyenne or Des Moines didn't have to be shut down. Those are larger populated areas than, say, a rural county in my state of Minnesota or a rural county in any state. So, and the answer is you wouldn't have to have a statewide ban treating every part of Minnesota as if it was Minneapolis. But with a left-leaning governor, it's going to be less of a concern for him in this case to do a more sweeping policy. And then when he does that, which he just extended, the people cheer for him. People cheer him on, and many get angry. It's pretty split in our state. We're fairly purple. We're susceptible to our ideology for a couple of reasons today. One, the internet has exacerbated political speech and political thought so that we have a bit more extreme, and that's why all issues from immigration to maybe homelessness have been polarized in how to react to them. We all want safe, healthy communities, but the ways in which to go about them, those methods have been either or, black and white. So the internet has just sort of exacerbated the polarity. But the other thing too is we have the luxury of being ideological. Actually, it's funny. This very article I wrote here was about how ideology kind of goes out the window when someone's life is on the line. And you might say, well, and in that context, it was about inner city youth and a lot of them getting into violent and dangerous lifestyles and crime, and some losing their lives or being shot. And how when you've got such a serious situation as that, you're not going to worry about, if you're going to help those youth with a conservative, tough love way, or if you're going to help them with more of a liberal or left-leaning kind of nurturing and supportive way necessarily. You're going to do what works. You just want to do what works because the situation is dire. And you could certainly say that's the case here. But a lot of people aren't affected by this virus, right? The vast majority of people are not going to be touched by this virus. And by that, I mean, they're not going to know anyone who's sick, right? The numbers are large, but they still aren't, but they're dwarfed by the entire population. I think we've had 12,000 deaths, and I don't know how many people have been sick. Let's say there's 200,000. Let's say there's even 1 million, but that's not even close to 1% of the population again, even that. So it's easy for people to fall back on their ideologies and become susceptible to falling prey to them. And so you'll root for that which falls in line with your ideology more so than what really is the best way, or at least numerically data-driven, scientifically the best way. And even that's hard to come up with because there's still different ways, and there's different ways to measure the repercussions of a broken economy and how much of a shutdown is even going to help reduce infections of this virus. So even the data isn't clear, but you muddle that with the luxury of ideology, and we're able to sit back and cheer for the methods we prefer than the methods that might be best. It's not that ideology will ever be out of play, but as much as, but we don't want to have it become outsized. We don't want that factor to be outsized to the point where it's influencing us to do things that are downright harmful. Some could say that's what these conservative states are doing. They're putting their populations at risk because they're more about ideologues and conservatism than they are about the health of their citizens. But then you can also say the same thing coming from conservatives and talking to liberals and saying, oh my gosh, they're shutting down even rural counties because they don't care about deaths of despair from a depression, from addiction, from homelessness. They only care about shutting things down because that's the way they want to do it. Unified, powerful, taken action, whatever. So both sides can claim ideology as a factor harming the situation. I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There are conspirators out there now saying this is all planned by those shutting the government down. I am not interested in going that far. I think this is all just ideologically driven. And there are more people susceptible to ideologically driven and at times radically ideologically driven policy than before. And by before, I mean decades past in the U.S., where, you know, in the 80s, I hear about senators and House of Representatives, people from both sides, Republican, Democrat, hanging out, and, you know, they got along, and now they don't get along at all. They don't even communicate a lot of the time. So things are just more polarized in general, and it seems like ideology is a bigger factor in our politicians and policymakers. And so I can definitely see it possibly being a larger factor here, but and then as well for our own response to how we should best address the pandemic. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that point, and I hope wherever you live, you're able to be getting through this safely and healthily, and that your loved ones are healthy. I'm here in Minnesota, where we are shut down for the remainder of April into May, and it'll definitely at least be a situation we can learn from. Okay, hope you're doing well wherever you are. Bye.